understanding. Probably, rather than getting into the theory, let's discuss some of the questions which are hard, which are really, really, complex in terms of their answers. So, are you guys following the Ukraine crisis right now? What's happening over there? You guys know that there's a war happening in Ukraine, right? Any idea as to why, or anybody has any thoughts on what caused this war? What's happening over there, really? Srividya.
So I read from what I'm reading from newspapers. Sure. I feel that Russia is like very apprehensive of the expansion of NATO, and Ukraine was planning on becoming a member. So Russia doesn't have really any natural borders. Right. So if Ukraine does become a NATO member, the West would be right on the borders of Russia. And Russia is always afraid of an invasion from the West. So that could that's one geopolitical reason probably for the war on Ukraine.
That's very well put. And I can tell you that many people who are also reading newspapers cannot put it that clearly. So Srividya, once you complete your education, please do apply it to our think tank for a job. And let's see if we can work together. So thanks for that. I mean, geopolitics and international trade, etc., is the sort of research that we do typically. Okay, Raman, you also had something to add over there.
Yes, sir. So I have another perspective. So Ukraine has one of the largest petroleum mines in the Europe.
Okay.
And once Russia gains control over Ukraine, so Russia can easily, dominate on the upper hand, and will have upper hand in Europe as well as in Asia in terms of petroleum extraction.
So you're like, it's for the petrol these guys are doing it.
Mainly because of that, because nowadays, if we see, like, for example, countries, the Saudi Arabian, the OPEC countries, or which do trading in terms of only petrol and petroleum products, they earn a lot and it's enough to boost their economy. So I'm kind of thinking Russia will be benefited from the petroleum it will get from Ukraine after annexing Ukraine.
Okay. So and I mean,
yeah, that's the one of the main reason I'm thinking.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Not something that a lot of people are talking about. Okay, similar question, controversial question, and if you want, we can get the recording deleted later on. What do you think? What are our views on, the problems of Kashmir? How do we solve that sort of a problem where, these two nations who have sort of, at their necks, and because of that, a whole population is suffering. Any ideas, any thoughts about that? How did that happen? And please don't give me the whole history, but just tell me what's the solution according to you, Raman.
So basically, why people are the countries are fighting for Kashmir, like India and Pakistan are fighting for Kashmir. Kashmir has one of the highest altitude. So it was said that the one who has a control on Kashmir has a control on the whole of Asia. So that's the main reason why we India and Pakistan are fighting for Kashmir. And I don't know how.
I suspect that sort of a reasoning. I mean, you could be right in your place, but then neither India nor Pakistan, as far as I'm concerned, has any control over Asia. So that theory is disproven already.
In terms of military-wise, I'm talking about control.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, that's a theory. That's certainly a theory which is worth considering.
And I seriously don't know how, any of the hypothetical model wherein the Kashmir crisis can be stopped.
Yeah. Okay.
It should be in a diplomatic manner wherein both the sides agree.
Okay. No, that's true. That's absolutely true. But it becomes really hard. Dhruv, you had something to add over there, so I'll let you speak and then we dive into what we are trying to do over here. So, Dhruv, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, so my internet is lagging a bit, but I had a very simple point about Raman said. So I don't think
Okay.
there's an elaborate
All right. Thank you.
that I can. That's why I
Okay.
lower down.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. So essentially, if you look at the Ukraine issue, to some extent, even if you look at the Kashmir issue, to another extent, if you look at the Israel-Palestine issue, and there are a bunch of sustainability issues also related to this. If you've heard the term prisoner's dilemma, uh, a lot of times in popular articles, popular newspapers, a lot of times these countries get stuck in the prisoner's dilemma. One way of looking at the problem is that Russia and NATO are themselves stuck in a prisoner's dilemma, and Ukraine is collateral damage of that. That Ukraine just happened to be in a country between these two countries. And these two countries also don't have much of a cause to go against each other. They just consider each other as enemies. But once you consider another entity as an enemy, and once you get logged in that sort of mindset, then there is a lot of mistrust that if the other party does something, we should be prepared to counter that. And the other party is also thinking in the same way that the other party does something, so we should be prepared to counter that. And gradually, both the parties, they ramp up their defenses, they ramp up their offenses, and that can lead to a full-scale war. Very intuitively, if you look at any sort of an arms race, that that person has two nuclear warheads, that means in order to match that, I should have two nuclear warheads as well. And then I will start thinking that the other party has two nuclear warheads, so we don't have an advantage now, so I must have three now. Then the other party will also get three, and then we'll keep increasing our nuclear warheads. And that's the sort of arms race that countries get into typically. Okay. Now, how does that work out game theoretically? So I'll just show you a very simple game. Okay, we're going to play an extremely simple game, and through that, we will understand a lot about some of these concepts. So, in fact, if we get some time, rather than getting into too much theory right now, I have a whole slide of theories. Perhaps we will get playing an online game right now after this. Okay, so I need two volunteers. Since I have Rishabh and Latika over here, can I just take you both as two volunteers? You don't have to do a lot. Okay, so the setting is that there are 5 apples kept inside of a classroom. Okay, now these 5 apples are equivalent to the sum total of all of the critical resources which are needed in the world. All right. You both are standing outside of the classroom. You both are heads of 2 warring tribes in the world. Okay. And both of your tribes are equal in strength. Their needs are equal. In all aspects, they are equal. All right. Or you could consider yourself nations, tribes, whatever. All right. Now, you are standing outside of the classroom, and what I'm asking you to do is to go first, decide outside of the classroom before going in that how do you intend to divide up these apples amongst yourselves. So Rishabh and Latika, just feel free to make an offer, negotiate a little, and come to a decision as to how will you divide these 5 apples amongst yourselves. Over to you guys.
So, I mean, I would go with the diplomatic approach by giving like half and half. So, like,
2.5
I
to
mean,
one, two
yeah,
and a half to another.
2.5, if that's possible. Like,
Okay.
I would take that approach.
Latika, would you accept that offer?
Yeah, I think even I would go with that itself.
Amazing. So, this is how a civilized world should look like, right? So, what you guys are opting for, we are going to call it, for the purpose of our discussion, we are going to call it the dove strategy or the cooperative strategy. All right. The opposite of that strategy is something that we'll call either the non-cooperative or the defect or the hawk strategy. Okay, so the doves are the nice people, the hawks are the fighters. All right. So you guys have decided to play the dove strategy. And what you guys have done is that you guys have decided to divide it half and half. You guys shake hands before entering the class and you say, let's just do it that way. Okay. But my prediction over here, by the way, one thing I need to tell you, that do not derive the wrong lessons from game theory. I was told this by my professor. So Kaushik Basu taught me game theory. And this is something that he taught in the class. And we'll also learn today that, some of the lessons from game theory, they don't need to be that bad. But initially it might feel like, I'm just asking you to be a mean person. That's not what it is about. All right. So my prediction is that you guys will not eventually play the cooperative game once you enter that classroom. Why? So let's say, Latika is entering the classroom and Latika thinks that, talk is cheap. Rishabh said that, he's going to be a nice person. He's going to be a gentleman. So, and also, there's one knife kept inside the classroom as well, okay, in a cupboard, okay, somewhere. So, Latika will start thinking that, what if I am walking in coolly, I'm trying to look for where the knife is, and meanwhile, Rishabh just pounces upon the table, runs away with all 5 of the apples. What am I going to do? Right? Because you both are not going to see each other after that one game. And these are critical resources. And whoever has more of them becomes the dominant tribe. Right? And one assumption in game theory, and for the psychologists, behavioral economists over here to talk about, one assumption of game theory is that human beings are rational, which is that, we like to maximize our benefits, minimize our costs. Okay. And I know if you've read your Daniel Kahneman, I know if you've read your Sunstein, you tell me human beings are not rational. They operate under bounded rationality, which is still fine. Some of it changes, but broadly, the game theoretical rules still apply, even if human beings are operating under bounded rationality. Some perception of payoffs can change, but for our purpose right now, that's one assumption that we'll go with. Okay. There is another assumption in game theory. I'll come to that very soon. Okay. So over here, Latika starts thinking that, what if I am walking in coolly and Rishabh just pounces upon the table, runs away with 5 apples? Latika doesn't want to be in this position where Rishabh has all 5 apples, Latika has none. Right? Similarly, Rishabh will be having similar thoughts. That talk is cheap. I know we shook hands, but it's not as if, I'm dealing with saints over here. What if I walk in coolly and I'm trying to look in for the knife and Latika pounces upon the table and runs away with all 5 of the apples? Okay. Rishabh doesn't want to be in this situation where he leaves with nothing. What's the face you're going to show to your tribe back home? You don't want to leave with this, and Latika wants, where Latika, just runs away with all 5 of the apples. So what is your best strategy in that case? Okay, also let's say that, my prediction was that you both are going to fight. And if you both fight, if you both play hawks, then you will also destroy one apple in that fight. There'll be a scuffle. You'll exchange a few punches. I hope not too harsh, but you'll also destroy one apple in that fight. Okay. So if these are the thoughts that are running in your mind, that, okay, we shook hands, but what if this person does this? You're also thinking, what if the other person does this? The eventual outcome is going to be this, that you both are going to play defect. Why? Let me also explain that to you with some numbers. Okay. So let's say, Rishabh, you are playing and you don't know what sort of person Latika is. All right. So Latika can either play cooperate. Okay. Sorry. Thank God I can't give you guys this flu over Zoom. Okay. So, all right. So Latika can either play cooperate. Latika can play defect. You don't know. You absolutely just don't know what sort of person Latika is. Now, let's say you are an idealist and you decide that I am going to play cooperate in any case. I don't know what sort of person Latika is. I'm going to play cooperate in any case. So if Latika also cooperates, you're fine and good. You both divide 2.5, 2.5. I'm just writing how much you will get, Rishabh. So you go with 2.5 if Latika turns out to be a nice person. Okay. If Latika does not turn out to be a nice person, Latika defects, then she runs away with 5, you get 0. Okay. So your average payoff for this cooperative strategy is 2.5 plus 0 divided by 2. Okay. There are 2 strategies. So total payoff divided by the number of strategies. So your average payoff of playing cooperate is 1.25. All right. Then let us say that you were, instead of being an idealist, you were an arc realist. You said that I will only play defect. I don't know what sort of a person Latika is. I am only going to play defect and we'll figure out how it goes. So if Latika cooperates, then you've hit the jackpot. You run away with 5. Okay. If Latika doesn't cooperate, you guys have a fight, you destroy one apple, you still leave with 2. Right? The average payoff of these two is 3.5. 5 plus 2 divided by 2. Right? 3.5. So without knowing how Latika is going to play, what's your safest strategy over here?
So your safer strategy would be to play defect because the average is higher. Yeah.
Right. And the same would be the case for Latika, because Latika is also going through exact.
Hi all, I'm so sorry about that inconvenience.
Thanks, guys. This might happen a little bit today. Today I'm back at my hometown because of some family gathering, and this is Firozabad in Uttar Pradesh, and we are really not great at providing electricity to our citizens over here. We are always choosing the government that chooses not to provide us electricity anyway. Okay. All right. Where were we? We were playing this game. All right. So you guys understand as to why Latika and Rishabh will eventually, if they're rational players, gonna play the Hawk strategy. And they're going to end up in a suboptimal equilibrium. So an optimal equilibrium would have been 2.5, 2.5. That's the greatest outcome that you can get. But just because of rational expectations, just because I expect the other player to be rational and in their rationality to play the defect strategy, because that's the most fail-safe strategy, I will also play the most fail-safe strategy, which is defect. And my opponent knows that I am going to play the most fail-safe strategy. So they are also going to play the most fail-safe strategy. So we are locked into this equilibrium of sorts. Okay. And this is essentially, this is called the Nash equilibrium. I'll talk about the Nash equilibrium very quickly. But before that, herein comes the second assumption in game theory, which is the assumption of rational expectations or the common knowledge of rationality, which means that I know that you are rational. You know that I am rational. I know that you know that I am rational. Okay. And I know that you know that I know that you are rational, and so on and so forth for the both of us. Okay. So that is, when we have that knowledge, common knowledge of rationality, we have these sort of outcomes. That's why a lot of times, just to escape this common knowledge of rationality, a lot of country leaders would try and pose themselves as irrational. That I am just going to do the irrational thing, because if you're asking me to, if you are expecting rationality over here, then we are sure to fight. Okay. So don't take panga with me. I'll do the irrational thing. All right. So that is the case, but eventually this is going to happen in our game, and where we are, the sort of situation we are stuck in is called a Nash equilibrium. All right. Now, the way that this game is depicted formally looks like a table like this. Okay. In that table, you see that there are two parties and one can play rows. This could be any strategies. Right now, it is defect and cooperate. It could have also been three strategies. So we could have added a row over here. So this person plays by changing rows. This person plays by changing columns. Okay. So imagine you have a joystick or a lever that you can either go up, down, or you could go left, right with that. Okay. So whatever you see in red or on the left side of the comma, those are this person's payoffs. Payoffs means the amount of money or apples or whatever resource you get by playing a particular strategy. And whatever you see in the black is the other person's payoffs. Okay. This guy's payoffs. All right. So which means that over here, 2-2 essentially means that if this player plays 2 and if this player plays defect and this player also plays defect, then each of them get 2 and 2. Okay. Now this happens to be our Nash equilibrium as well. And what do we mean by a Nash equilibrium? Let's first understand the definition. Nash equilibrium is any set of strategies. Okay. Any set of strategies. So defect is a set of strategy. 2-2 is not a set of strategy. So I'll always talk about Nash equilibrium and strategy sets, strategy combinations. Any set of strategies from which no player would want to unilaterally deviate. Okay. So on their own, so if both of you, let's say, imagine that both of you are stuck over here on 2-2, then nobody would want to unilaterally deviate from their own strategy. Okay. So defect cooperate for another game could also be a Nash equilibrium. In this particular game, defect is the Nash, because let's see, Latika would Latika want to move from defect to cooperate, come from up to down? No, because defect gives her 2 and cooperate, while Rishabh is not cooperating. Rishabh is still playing defect. Latika has no incentive to cooperate because 2 is better than 0, right? Similarly, will unilaterally Rishabh change his strategy from defect to cooperate? So unilaterally means Latika is still in defect and Rishabh starts cooperating. Rishabh would not want to do that. Sorry. Because 2 is better than 0. So which means that you're stuck over here in many ways. Okay. Notice how 2.5 is not a Nash equilibrium, because The way to check is that you imagine yourself in that situation and check whether anybody has an incentive to unilaterally shift or change their strategy. Let's say you're here, okay? And Latika plays up, down, all right? Rishabh plays left, right. So does Latika has any incentive to move from cooperate to defect?
So the only reason why that wouldn't, even though it's the most ideal situation, it wouldn't be the equilibrium, because I'm not sure of what he'll play. So if he plays, if I cooperate and he decides to defect, then I'll get nothing. And if both of us cooperate, I'll get 2.5. So I'd take the safest option and just consider to a defect.
Exactly. And what's also the case over here, Latika, is that, let's say imaginary situation, I give you both the joystick, which is set at cooperate right now, okay? And you have the option, if I give you the option that you can change your strategy for once. Will you change your strategy? You will, because you will move. I tell you that Rishabh will not be able to change his strategy. Rishabh will remain at cooperate. You have the opportunity to change your strategy if you want to. Will you do it? You will still do it because 5 is better than 2.5. For you, that's the bonanza that, you get 5 apples and Rishabh gets none. For you, the perfect situation is that Rishabh is cooperating and you are defecting. That's awesome for you, right? So similarly for Rishabh, if given an opportunity that, Latika will remain at cooperate, Rishabh, would you want to change your strategy from cooperate to defect? So, which means Latika remains at cooperate, Rishabh jumps from cooperate to defect. Rishabh would be glad to choose that option, to take that option, because Rishabh gets a 5 in that case, and 5 is much better than 2.5. Right? So, the idea that means is that if given an option, would anybody want to unilaterally change their strategy? If that is the case, that means that strategy set is not a Nash equilibrium. Okay. Similarly, this is not Nash, this is not Nash. No point spending more time in discussing. So essentially, the idea behind a Nash equilibrium is that any set of strategy from which you cannot deviate unilaterally. All right. Now, okay, there are 4 ways, there are 4 strategies to get people to cooperate. And getting people to cooperate is really, really important, because all of our public administration, all of our society, all of our public policy runs on cooperation. You must have heard about this thing called the resource curse, which means that countries which have resources tend to do pretty badly. And typically, the examples are given of countries, such as Mozambique, a number of usually poor countries who find resources. Venezuela is one great example, that you find resources in this country. Venezuela, for example, is extremely oil rich, but is a poor country, because what typically happens in those is that, rather than playing cooperate, people are always stuck in defect, and they are destroying that one apple in their fight. So different tribes, different groups, they start fighting with each other. You have foreign players also jumping in and also, making it worse. You can also think about Indian colonialism in that way. France, everybody in India was fighting for a piece of the pie because it was a big economy. And then you saw France, Portugal, England just coming in and also actually fighting with each other. You had so many fights between France and the French and the British while they were in India. And they were siding with one Nawab or another Zamindar, etc. So eventually, when over a period of time, a society is getting 2 as an outcome where it could get 2.5, then that means that society is not developing at the rate at which it could develop. And falls behind the other societies. And that's one great, idea from an economist called Manker Olson, who has written a book called The Rise and Decline of Nations. And, his idea, there's a lot of his ideas, and I can, typically when I teach the whole course, I talk about much of them, but this is the underlying logic about his ideas, that, this typically happens in nations which see a decline in themselves within the nations. All right. At this stage, does anybody have any doubts? Because we are going to be talking about slightly more complex stuff after this. No doubts as of now? All right. Okay. So I also have two questions for you. One way to go from this is that I explained to you how to break out from this bad Nash equilibrium. Okay, that's one line of discussion that we can go ahead with. Another thing that we can do is that we play a game and we understand what sort of strategy is eventually the best sort of strategy to apply, especially in an international competition setting or a political competition setting. So that is more of the international relations route of this lecture. If we go this way, that is more of a sustainable development route of this lecture. So do we play a computer simulation game and go the IR route? Or do we move ahead and understand how do you break this Nash equilibrium from more theoretical and sustainability route? Your call, guys. So those who want to play that game, raise your hands. You know that at the bottom left, you have a raise, bottom right, you have reactions, and then you can raise your hands from there. Those who want to play that game, raise your hands. Those who want to play the other, those who want to move ahead with this part of the lecture. This is like that movie from where you can choose where to go next, all right? So you can just show me any other emoji if you want to go ahead with the sustainability route over here. Anyone?
So what's the question?
The question is that one way to go from here is that we can play a game. That's an online simulation. Okay. And we can talk about what strategies as a player should you adopt given the strategies of other players. So if you're dealing with a person who's always nice versus you're dealing with a person who's always terrible. So what should be your best strategy for that? The other is that in a society which is stuck in this defect Nash equilibrium, how do you bring that society out of that, okay, for its growth? So given our limited time, I can give you that option to choose either of those routes.
So I think the society one would be better.
Okay. Anybody else?
So I want to know how to get out of the...
All right. All right. Okay. Let's talk about how do we get out of it. Okay. So these are our strategies to escape the prisoner's dilemma. One is the carrot and stick strategy. Okay. So I give you punishments. All right. Essentially, what I need to do in this strategy, I can give you rewards or I can also give you punishments. And here some bit of behavioral economics also comes in because you know that, losses loom larger than gains in behavioral economics, etc., etc. But without getting into that right now, what you do is that if you're stuck over here, let us say that I put an automaton, a robot outside of that classroom. Okay. And I can program that robot however I can. Okay. what programming, what algorithm should I feed into that robot? Okay. And I'll tell the players, I'll tell Rishabh and Latika that this is the algorithm. There is a particular algorithm which will ensure that Rishabh and Latika will cooperate and will not defect. Anybody wants to take a wild guess as to what that algorithm could be? I could also put a police wala over there, right? Instead of a robot, a police wala also works. But the thing with human beings is that they can be corrupted, right? So maybe Rishabh gives some bribe and Latika gives some bribe, and those. And that's one thing that we do terribly badly in our policy making, because all of our policies, we typically say, ki this policy looks very good on paper, it's awesome on paper, but when you implement it, doesn't work. And a lot of times the problem is that the bureaucrats who are implementing those policies, they are assumed to be robots who are not part of the game. So one assumption or one central thesis of game theory is that you cannot change, unless you change people's game of life, a law is not really going to change the behavior. People will tend towards a Nash equilibrium. It could be a good Nash equilibrium. It could be a bad Nash equilibrium. I'll also give you examples of good Nash equilibrium if you want. Okay. We'll actually turn this into a good Nash equilibrium as well. But the idea is that, just by telling people that, you would not pollute the river, okay, it's not as if people will stop polluting it. We saw with the Ganga and Yamuna, I was actually in my hometown during the COVID lockdown. The rivers which had been dirty for many, many, many decades became cleaner during the COVID lockdown because the factories were all shut, right? But after the factories opened up again, the rivers became dirty again. Okay. And the law has been in place. The National Green Tribunal has said for many, many years now that no factory will pollute the river. Otherwise, there are fines, penalties, jail, etc., etc. But all of the factories still do it because they're able to bribe one officer or the other. They're able to do a number of things. That law becomes ink on paper. It doesn't change people's game of life if that is not crafted in a particular manner. Yeah, and we'll talk about how do you craft laws in that case. Okay, so how do I program this automaton? Or if there was a police person who was, let's say, dead honest, how do I program that person? What instructions do I give to that person so that these guys know that these are the instructions which are known? These guys will know that these are the instructions which are known. I'll tell them before they go inside that room that this is the instructions I've given to the policeman or policewoman. And based on that, you guys decide how you want to play. What's that thing that I should tell the police person over there? Or what's that algo that I should feed into that robot? Wild guess. Think carrots and sticks. Think sticks. Okay, so hear me out. What if I tell the robot that if you see either of them coming out with 5 apples with the room, then the robot's eyes should turn red. The robot should quickly run to that person and take away 4 of the apples from that person. All right. So which means that if Latika is coming out with 5, that means Latika played defect and this poor guy was playing cooperate. So the robot would run to Latika, take 4 apples and turn this payoff from 5 to just 1. Similarly, if Rishabh was playing defect, the robot would recognize Rishabh is coming out with 5 apples, would rush to Rishabh, take 4 apples from Rishabh and turn this from 5 to 1. All right. Is that clear? That can happen, right? And these are typically the ways that we make laws, that if you've committed a crime, then, we are going to punish you for this. Now, suddenly this becomes a Nash equilibrium. How? Because if you are here, let's say both joysticks are here, and I give Latika a choice that if Rohit was going to be here, Rishabh is going to be here, sorry, Rishabh cannot change his joystick, let's say. Would you move from 2.5 to 1? Latika, would you? No, no?
No.
Yeah. Because 2.5 apples are better than 1 apple, right? Similarly, if I ask Rishabh, would you move from 2.5 to 1? Latika is going to, her joystick is going to get stuck over here. If you are allowed to move your joystick, would you unilaterally change your strategy? Would you?
No, sir, I wouldn't say.
So, which means that this has become a Nash equilibrium right now as well. But currently in this game, there are 2 Nash equilibria, because even if you're stuck over here, you don't want to go from 2 to 0. You don't want to go from 2 to 0. So I want to further program this automaton and turn it in a manner where there is only one Nash equilibrium, which is a good Nash equilibrium. That's 2.5, 2.5. So what I'll do is that I will further program it, and I'll say that also, just in case, if you see both of them coming out with 2 apples each, that means both of them have been junglies, both of them have fought. And you remember our teachers doing that in school, right? Now schools are a lot more liberal, but teachers doing that in school, if that 2 people are fighting, both of them get to stand outside of the class. Both of them get punished. Okay, so I tell this robot that, if you see both of them coming out with 2 apples, then not only you take those apples away from them, also administer a shock as a punishment to each of them. Okay, so make this 2, 2 as -1, -1. All right. Now, even defect is not a Nash equilibrium, because from -1, if you both are stuck over, all right. Let me share the screen again. Okay. So this much you guys have understood that, how do I inflict the right punishments to just make one good Nash equilibrium over here, which is 2.5, 2.5. Essentially, what I'm doing is that I'm changing the payoffs. I'm making this as 1. I'm making this as 1. And I'm turning this as -1. -1. Okay. This bit is clear, right? Cool. Okay. Another thing that I can do is that I can make that game a game until infinity. So which means that they would come they both will come every day. They will play this game every day, divide these 5 apples amongst themselves every day until infinity. Okay. And that we've seen turns out to be a good cooperative formula. You look at Britain and France, worst of enemies for most of the history, medieval period, King of England calling himself the King of Britain and France, King of France calling himself King of France and Britain. Both of them having competing claims on common territories, were fighting together for many, many centuries. But comes the modern time, they are the best buddies all the time. World War I, World War II. After that, Britain and France always fighting together against somebody else. Okay. What changed over there? Britain and France over many, many years realized that this other entity is going to remain. You are not going to be able to obliterate that other entity. It can grow and it can shrink, but it is an infinite entity that you're dealing with. Similarly, so, when you have infinite entities or a sense of infinite games, and that's also the reason why in a lot of religions, the way that, things are coded is that, you never die. You take birth after birth after birth, because religions want to bring in a sense of cooperation in the society. So one strategy of religion is that there will be one judgment day, and on that judgment day, there'll be carrots and sticks, which are going to be provided. Another is that, you create a sense of infinity, that, you have an infinite number of games to play. And when you have an infinite number of games to play, you can come to a cooperative equilibrium, because let's say Rishabh and Latika were playing this game over and over again. Now, one day, Rishabh thinks that, okay, let me take an advantage and let me defect. Okay, so Rishabh defects. Let's say day 1, day 2, day 3, they are still playing fine. On one given day, Rishabh decides to defect and Latika cooperates. Okay. Then after that day, Latika and Rishabh are stuck in this 2-2-2-2 forever, because after that day, Latika is also going to defect. Okay. Because if Rishabh is defected one day, Latika is also going to defect. And then to bring it to cooperate is not possible, because then you're stuck in a Nash equilibrium. Nobody will take that risk. So one day, instead of getting 2.5, which could have been the cooperative outcome, Rishabh got 5, which is 2.5 more than what he usually gets. Okay. So it's a bonus of 5 for one day. But for the rest of infinity, Rishabh only gets 2-2-2-2-2. Okay. Because after that, Latika is going to also play defect. So Rishabh has to play defect. Then after that, again, they both have to play defect, etc., etc. So look at the opportunity cost lost on each day. There's a gain of 2.5 on this day for Rishabh. Okay. On this day, Rishabh could have gained 2.5. Rishabh only got 2. So this day, Rishabh is in minus 0.5. Right? On the next day, Rishabh is again going to get 2. So opportunity cost lost, minus 0.5. Okay. And over a long period of time, when Rishabh is going to get a minus 0.5, then that one day of advantage will become worthless for Rishabh, because quickly you'll cover this 2.5 gap. And then for the rest of the life, so over a long period of time, we also discount our, payoffs. So over a long period of time, what happens is that this extra gain becomes meaningless. And since, we are rational individuals, from the beginning, we can backward calculate and we can understand that this is not worth it. If you're in an infinite game, it's not worth playing the defect game. And that's what happens with countries. So let's say even with India, Pakistan, in the hearts of hearts, we are still enemies, because we think that one party will be able to obliterate the other party and make that entity cease to exist one day or the other. Pakistan harbors dreams of disintegrating India. Their narrative is that, India is not a natural nation, not a natural entity. So one day or the other, they hope that India is going to just split out and disintegrate. Okay. Similarly, India also thinks that in Pakistan, either we will subsume them or we will get sent to defect, and one day Pakistan will cease to exist. As long as we are thinking like that, we are not in a game of infinity. And if we are not in a game of infinity, on the global scale, sometimes you have a hegemon like the US who can play the carrot and stick game. a lot of times you don't have anybody to play the carrot and stick game. So it's between these nations. Okay, there's no global police. The UN does not have a danda. UN can't do anything in this. So infinite games is extremely, extremely important. Now, a lot of times what also happens is that, let's say if these were not infinite games, cooperation will theoretically not come about in any game which is not infinite. All right. And the reason why that is the case is because, let's say this was a 4-stage game where for 4 days, these two folks are going to play this game over and over again. Okay. Now, if that is the case, then they can easily backward calculate, because even if they are cooperating on day 1, day 2, day 3, one of them can understand that on the last day, so let's say it is Rishabh who's doing the calculation. So Rishabh sees that day 1, okay, we cooperated. Day 2, okay, we cooperated. Hypothetically, right now the game is not started. All calculations are going on before you enter the game. Day 3, you are cooperating. Now, day 4, Rishabh thinks that if Latika has to win, because you're playing to win, right? Latika would want to take an advantage because we've been cooperating so far, right? So Latika, in order to win, would change her strategy from cooperate to defect on the last day. Latika cheats and gets 5 and gets an advantage, leaves. So Rishabh will think that that's not a great idea. So last day, let me also defect. Okay. And we talked about the common knowledge of rationality. Latika also knows that Rishabh is thinking that way. So Rishabh will cheat on the last day. So Latika's best response is to also cheat on the second last day. Or Latika can also think that last day's fate is sealed. We are both going to get 2-2. Okay. Which means that Rishabh would defect on the second last day, because Rishabh is also playing to win over here. So second last day, Rishabh will cheat. So which means that my best response should also to be cheat. So second last day, we're going to be cheating again. Okay. Similarly, third last day, both of them will think the same thoughts again, right up till the first day. So if there is any end stage, this could be 100 stages. But if there is any end stage in mind, you can backward calculate and you can figure out that, you know, on day 1, let's start cheating from, you're stuck in that Nash, a very bad Nash. You're stuck in the prisoner's dilemma. Okay. Now, however, in real life, it doesn't work like that. In real life, a lot of times, even if you break things down into stages, things still work out. Okay. You don't have to go up till infinity. Typically, what happens in security de-escalations as well is that, let's say you have a line of control. There's a disputed territory. You have line of control, one army on this side, one army on this side. All right. Now, if you want to de-escalate, de-escalation cannot happen when you ask both of the armies to immediately leave the territory. Okay. What you need to do is that first there'll be a declaration that we both intend to de-escalate. We both intend to play cooperate. Okay. Again, talk is cheap. So what's going to happen is that a very minimal sort of a withdrawal will be asked for. So that could be 1 kilometer, which is sort of costless, you know, the sort of withdrawal where even if you lose that little land, not much is lost. Okay. So some very little thing on which you can take a risk. Okay. So both armies withdraw 1 kilometer each. And the idea is that the other army, if they try to rush in and occupy the territory that we have ceded, we also have this is not so much territory which is super lucrative, but also we have enough time because we have also just withdrawn 1 kilometer. We have enough time to come back and re-establish the status quo. Okay. But if this army does not actually withdraw, then there is some trust between, does not actually come to reoccupy the land that we have ceded, and they remain in, you know, behind 1 kilometer of their withdrawal, that means that there is some sort of trust that we have established amongst ourselves, a little trust amongst ourselves. Okay. In that case, a little bit more of de-escalation can take place, withdraw by 3 kilometers each. If this person wants to cheat and they want to come and occupy even the territory that we have withdrawn from, we also have an equal chance to come back and reestablish the status quo. However, if they don't rush back in, then there is some more trust established between each other. And eventually we can completely withdraw. Okay. So even by breaking things down into stages, it also happens. One more sustainability example of that is that, you see a river, and let's say there are 3 factories on that river, factory A, factory B, factory C. And the government has said that all factories will have to install a waste treatment plant. Okay. If they want to, want to operate. So if they don't establish a waste treatment plant, then they are in trouble because, the government is going to penalize them. But look at how these factories are thinking. Okay, guys, after this, we are going to close this class. All right. This is the last example that we're going to talk about. Or are we here? Should we carry on? What should we do?
So we could carry on. I'll just go to the restroom. That's why.
Yes, so we can carry.
Okay, we'll just discuss this, and after that we'll close the class. All right. So here's what we're going to do. 3 factories, and these 3 factories, if they set up a waste treatment plant, then it's going to cost them 1 crore rupees. The government has asked them to spend 1 crore rupees. These waste treatment plants, they think that, they can bribe the police officer. And each of them starts thinking that, okay, what if I invest the 1 crore and the other 2 don't? It's like littering. What if, even if I stop littering, it's not as if the others are stopping. So the place is still going to be dirty. What they are going to think that if I spend that 1 crore, then I'm going to have fewer profits. I could be driven out of business because I am the only one spending 1 crore. The other 2 are just giving bribes to the police officers. So if I'm the only one who's paying 1 crore, not only am I driven out of the business, the river is still unclean. So, the world is not better and I'm worse off. So why should I do this? So this person will also choose to bribe. Similarly, this other person also chooses to bribe because he's also thinking, or she's also thinking, that what if I'm the only person who's spending 1 crore? I lose out on my business. The other 2, they survive and the river is still dirty. So no point. And the third person also thinking like that. But if you break it down into stages, if you ask first all 3 of them to come together and to sign a declaration and make a declaration to each other in front of the government that they intend to set up a waste treatment plant each in front of their factories because it is required now by law. That's stage number 1. But again, talk is extremely cheap. So you break it down into stages. In stage 1, they have to take a costless measure, which is to just show the government some land that they have left out to build the waste treatment plant. Okay, so no cost associated with that, just some space where the waste treatment plant could be set up, or some minimal cost, maybe a few lakhs. So all 3 of them, they leave this land. The government checks that all 3 of them have left this land, and they report it, let's say by photographs or whatever, to the government. Now, this person starts thinking that, hey, the other 2 have also left this land, so they could be serious about actually complying. Okay. And this is stage 1 is a costless measure. Stage 2 is essentially where the government asks them to give slightly higher commitment. So which could be that don't just leave this land out. Not only do you have to leave the land, spend some more money in setting up the pipelines over here. Okay, so that's probably going to cost you a few more lakhs. But now, since I know, if I'm factory owner one, if I suspect that the other person will also comply, because the other person in the first stage also left the land for this. If I suspect that the other person is going to also put in the pipelines, then I would not want to be left behind. I am also going to put in my pipelines. This other person is also thinking that if the other two are putting the pipelines, then I don't want to be the only person who's against the government. I should also put the pipeline. And the third person is also exactly thinking that in the first stage I saw, these people not only said that they want to comply, they also left some land for compliance. So, which means that they would also be laying down the pipeline. So I should also do it. So you increase the commitment stage by stage. Now, in the third stage, you ask them to actually spend the rest of the money and set up the waste treatment plant. Now, factory number one knows that this factory number two and factory number three have already taken some steps towards compliance. So they have a huge likelihood to also go the whole way. In that expectation that the others would do it, factory number one would also do it. Factory number two, similarly, in the expectation that the others are going to do it, it's also going to do it. And also the same with factory three. So just by breaking things down into stages, there are ways to bring about more compliance, more cooperation, etc., etc. Okay. Now, there are other ways. There is the institutional mechanism and making cooperation really, really lucrative. These are extremely, the institutional mechanism is what the UN, World Bank, etc., they take up. And making cooperation really, really lucrative is what, government does by giving subsidies, or private sector companies would do. If you want to get into the details of it, you can look it up. I have a number of my videos on YouTube on the GPODS website. And also, if you are interested in applying to the fellowship, you should just check out our website's page. And what we can do is, we'll know that you've attended this lecture. Just reach out to us, and when our admission committee sits, we can consider your application. But there's a lot to game theory. But eventually, remember that there are 4 ways to break out of a bad Nash equilibrium. One is the carrot and stick approach. Another is breaking it down into stages, or taking it to infinity. Number 3 is you can build institutions, and there's a whole logic to it. We are not getting into that logic right now. There's a game theoretical logic to it. And the 4th is making cooperation really, really lucrative. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I can probably also just give me a second. Add some of these links to the chat box over here. So this is essentially the website of our fellowship. And you see that all of these folks, you've got judges, you've got people from the UN, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, all of these people who are teaching at the fellowship as mentors. And we have a pretty diverse cohort of fellows as well. If you look at the current cohort of our fellows, we've had fellows from all of the top universities in the world, and typically 7 to 8 nationalities who come in as fellows. Many of them, from Harvard, from UPenn, and from great universities across the world. They would join in as fellows. It's a 3-month online fellowship program. So, for example, Ollie over here is from Cambridge. And then we have a bunch of people from the IITs, IIMs, etc., NLSs, Ashoka, Jindal, join in. And our hope is that some of you from Flame might also want to apply for this fellowship program. Our fellowship starts in summer, so it starts in June. So your deadlines are going to be 15th of April and 15th of May to apply for a program. It's a paid program, but we can always we do give generous scholarships, partial scholarships though, and I can also share my own LinkedIn contact over here. And typically what you'd expect is that right now the Ukraine crisis is going, so we'll get diplomats from those countries to talk to you as part of the fellowship, etc., etc. So, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or I'm also going to put my email address over here. And let's stay in touch. You can also follow me on Twitter. There's no slash over there. It's just Arpit CHTR. And if you're looking to make a career in any of these public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability, a lot of times our fellows get admissions into some of these great universities. So if you're looking to apply to universities abroad, sometimes what also happens is that our mentors would start working with fellows on projects or on capstones, etc., and many of them would write letters of recommendations for them. And a lot of times what also happens is that our fellows might get a job to work in some of the mentors organizations. That's also not unusual. Latika, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was asking, do you also offer internships like Global Policy?
We offer internships at Global Policy Insights, the think tank. So this fellowship is essentially backed by 3 organizations: Global Policy Insights, the think tank that I lead. Secondly, is the organization called Envipol, that's an environmental consulting firm. And the third is the ANCSSC, which is a body for NGOs organized by the United Nations Office of South-South Cooperation. So these 3 come together. Now, for our think tank, we would typically take masters and PhD students as our research interns. The other internships available at our think tank at the undergrad level would be usually in non-research positions where you could get some exposure to research, but most of the time your work would either be managerial, operational, or marketing and outreach, etc., etc. Because usually what we see is that when it comes to serious research about think tanks, you need people who at least have a master's degree. So, but yeah, we are more than happy to involve you in any of the things that we are doing. A lot of times, even our outreach interns start working with us on research projects. The fellowship is more like, it's an internship plus a 3-month Ivy League sort of a packed program. So it's a combination of an educational and an experiential sort of program. So that's what the fellowship is.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for me? I'm more than happy to answer. And I think you have one more lecture, which is going to be delivered by Ishan. And Ishan is the co-director of the fellowship along with me. And he is an LLM from Stanford. And I think his lecture is going to be more focused on sustainable development. This was the game theoretical aspect of it. But it was nice speaking with you guys, and I wish you all the best and hope to stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So, hi guys, good evening. I hope you had an enjoyable last session. While last session was derived from the instructor's profile, the next session will also be derived from my profile. So To understand where I'm coming from, let me set the context. I am by qualification an environmental lawyer. I hold a master's in environmental law and policy, and I teach. That's basically me. I have about 7 years of practice in environmental law under my belt. And in the past, I have had the luxury of working with organizations such as the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, United Nations headquarters, and a bunch of other international organizations as well. As you might have heard, I'm the co-founder of the Global Policy Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship, a 3-month online fellowship, where in fact, Flame is one of the few universities that we do not have a student from. So hopefully we can change that going forward. One of the top leading universities, I mean, and that should make you happy. All right. So that being said, what is it that I'm trying to do today? I'm trying to deconstruct the whole concept of environmental policy for all of you. You know, a lot of the times when we think of entering a profession of, say, a climate finance, which is supposed to be taking off climate law, if any of us are lawyers, and strictly in terms of environmental policy as well, we directly jump into this gamut of sustainability without really understanding what sustainability is. And that's my objective for the next 60 minutes, to help you all understand what is environment in the first place and how does that transcend into various platforms of what we understand to be in aspects of environment. So that's environmental finance, environmental policy, environmental economics, environmental management, environmental law, and those are the aspects that we're going to be looking at. Now, depending on the interaction that we have, I can make it a 90-minute session, or I can also end it at 60 minutes. I understand that it's a Sunday for all of you. So we'll see how that goes, but I would really encourage us to interact with me. I'm also available on LinkedIn if any of you want to get in touch with me after the lecture to discuss any of the things that we've discussed, or, you know, co-author a piece, get published, that sort of a thing. I'm always happy to do that as well. All right, so let's begin now. Now, these are some suggestions, some rules. The suggestions are that we should try and keep our videos on. Guys, again, I deliver lectures on a daily basis. A lot of the times, these are folks I don't know. So it gets very boring to look at your own face. If you can turn on your video, it'll be nice. I'll also encourage all of you to interact as much as possible, because again, the best form of learning would be through questions and answers and discussions. So I'd invite all of you to do that. So the rule is what is the safe space pledge, which is basically saying that as long as you're not hurtful towards someone, it's always welcome that you share your thoughts and opinions on anything that you have an opinion on, especially in relation to what we're discussing today. So I'd invite all of you to also share your opinions. And finally, what I explained to you on the first slide, that I'm trying to deconstruct the whole concept of environment for all of you, which means that I might not be able to do justice to every aspect that I cover, but I want all of us to at least get some aspects of what I am discussing. So it would be bits and pieces of everything, but if there's anything that you have questions about, I'm happy to elucidate further. All right. So as I was saying, another thing that isn't really mentioned on the slide is, and if you're interested, you might want to know, because there will be a lot of references on this. I'm an absolute astrophysics nerd. I'm not a scientist. I did not have science growing up. I did not like science as much, majorly because I did not understand it as well as others did. But I developed a very keen interest in astrophysics growing up. And ever since then, I've been reading everything astrophysics, and I've been listening to everything astrophysics. So I'll have a lot of references generally to astrophysics. I'm not an expert. So if you have any questions about that aspect, You could write to me. I could send you sources, but I'm not really sure if I'd have all the answers about astrophysics at least. But those examples are there to understand and draw analogies with what's happening in the environmental domain. All right. So talking of astrophysics, this is a quote that really resonates with me. And for those of us who do not know, Carl Sagan was a science communicator. He was himself a cosmologist, an astrophysicist, and he did a lot towards education generally, but also science education specifically. And this quote basically says that if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Now, what does this mean? Basically, if you're asking a friend of yours to make an apple pie from scratch, does it mean that he or she has to go get apples from the supermarket, get flour from the supermarket, sugar from the supermarket, baking powder from the supermarket, and then construct a pie? Or does it mean that that friend has to grow an apple because it's from scratch? Does that mean, if we take it further, does that friend have to come up with the seed, for which you need to invent the soil, for which you need to invent the atmosphere, for which you need to invent the planet and solar system and galaxy and the whole universe? So how far back can you go in order to invent something or make something from scratch? And this is one of the major issues that we face when we are jumping into a new paradigm within the climate change sphere, within the sustainability sphere, which is that some of us are interested towards climate activism or climate finance or climate banking or climate markets. All of those things come from, or you'll have a better understanding of all of those spheres if you're able to go back and invent the climate universe. And climate universe starts, this is the climate Big Bang. What is environment? The question, how would you define environment, is the first basic question of understanding climate change, right? So this basically on your screens is the globally accepted definition of environment. So environment typically includes human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganisms, property, and their interrelationship amongst each other. And if you actually look at the Indian legislation, the Environment Protection Act or the NGT Act, both of them define environment. The definition includes each of these factors, right? So legally, environment is supposed to include human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, and their interrelationship amongst each other, right? Now, so my question, and there are going to be a lot of questions for all of you. So my first question for all of you is, can you figure out any commonality amongst all of these factors that make up the environment? So we have water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property. These are the factors that that come together to define the term environment legally. Do you think that if there's a single thread that flows through each of these terms? Anyone? Is there something absolutely that jumps out to you when you think of all of these terms? Yes, Dhruv, you could unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, so I think these are all catered around to the human beings in a space. So the
Yes.
water they consume, the kind of air they're breathing in, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. So that's exactly it. So if you look at the factors that define, the indicators that define environment legally, water, as Dhruv said, is required for human beings to survive. Air is required for human beings to survive. Land is required for human beings to survive, and so on and so forth. So each of these factors that make up the environment are actually factors that are required for you and me to survive. So the other way to, the corollary to this is, or the other way to look at this is that environment is defined in a way that it could sustain human beings, it could sustain you and me, right? So every factor that human beings require for their sustenance makes up the definition of environment, right? Now, whether that's right, whether that's wrong, I don't know if all of us are acquainted with ecocentrism and anthropocentrism, but we'll come to it. But this definition of environment itself, the one on which we beg and plead the governments and the civil society and the private sector to act, that itself is tailor-made for human beings to survive and not for the environment to survive, right? So that's the first thing. The second question that I have for all of you is that, is there also something that you can find to be missing from this definition? Something obvious that should have been a part of this definition, but that is left out. Something that quite obviously makes up the environment, or not so obviously makes up the environment, or should make up the environment, but is not included in the definition of the term. If you guys could think of anything that is blatantly missing from this definition of environment. So we know that by now, water, air, land, other living creatures, plant, microorganism, property, human beings, all of them come within the scope of the term environment. If these things come within the scope of environment legally, by definition, then what is missing according to you guys? Any guesses? Yes, Rishabh.
So I think the fact that these have to be used in a sustainable manner is missing.
Right.
Because...
So that's a very good point. Rishabh, basically what you're saying is that their interdependence on each other in a way that they could be sustained through time, right, is a concept that should have been included in the definition itself.
Yes.
Right. Okay. That's a good point. A point that has been raised earlier in one of my lectures and very well appreciated by the audience as well. Anything else? What might be missing? Again, think of it in terms of how human beings are the consumers of the legal definition of the environment, right? So what is it that human beings do not require but should be a part of the definition? Anyone? Okay, I'll tell you what. In November 2019, I read this news report in The Sun, the daily in London, the newspaper in London. And this news report basically said that there's a golden asteroid floating somewhere between Mars and Jupiter, right? And this, I mean, it's called the golden asteroid. It's not the golden asteroid. There's an asteroid floating between Mars and Jupiter. And this asteroid is supposed to contain precious metals worth 8,000 quadrillion pounds, right? So that's 8 followed by 18 zeros. And these precious metals include gold, platinum, iron, nickel, and a bunch of other precious metals as well. And there are plans of SpaceX and NASA to go and explore or launch a visit to this asteroid this year. Now, I was reading this report and I was thinking that exploration is one thing, but it's quite obvious that if you're going to an absolute, for the lack of a better term, minefield of precious metals, you want to bring some back, right? You might want to mine some of those metals that are already there. And if that is to be done by the actors who go to the golden asteroid and Psyche 16, then would any mining law be applicable to them, or would any environmental policy be applicable to them? Would any environmental impact assessment need to be done before they do the mining activity? And the answer is No, right? Now, why is that? That is because this Psyche 16 or any other asteroid or anything beyond Earth's surface, as Dhruv said, is not within our definition of environment, and hence any environmental policy, any environmental law, any mining law, any environmental impact assessment would not be applicable to this activity. So the first thing that we need to challenge ourselves on is that legal definitions should be seen holistically in a way that they should be inclusive, right? Now, our understood legal definition of the term environment excludes 99.9999% of the universe, right? It's only the planet Earth in our understanding of it as it is. But with the advent of space laws and space policy and so many other things, there's one whole, again, quite literally, universe that needs to be explored. And then to not define environment in a way that it could include things that are beyond what is required for your or my sustenance is the question that we're raising here, right? So the first thing to learn is to think about things from a curiosity of understanding what they are, okay? Now, some of you might say that, listen, why are you criticizing the definition of environment, that it serves human beings? It is framed by human beings. So it will obviously serve human beings. If it was framed by dolphins, they would, the definition would have served dolphins, and if it was framed by aliens, it would have served aliens. And that's a fair call. But my larger argument here is that the definition has excluded or does not contemplate so much of the universe itself. And that's why it falls short of doing justice to environment. That's point one. The second point is that it only does justice to human beings, because those are the things that are required for human beings to survive, right? Now, for those of you who are still not convinced about this, I have a question for all of you. And I have made it as simple as I could have by putting the whole periodic table on your screens. But if you had to guess, and I do not expect you to know, but if you had to guess, what are the 5 most prominent elements found in the universe? If you had to guess, which are the 5 most abundant, commonly available elements found in the universe? You could check on your screens from the periodic table. I do not expect you to know the answers to this question especially, but if you would like to guess. All right, Aditya says hydrogen and helium. Anyone else? By the way, Aditya, right, those are 2 of the 5. Anyone else wants to take a guess? Hydrogen, helium are 2. What else? Carbon, yes. Silicon isn't one of them, but oxygen is, and so is nitrogen. Yes, so we've got all the 5 elements that are the most abundant elements found in the universe. So hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Okay. Now I want us to leave helium aside, as you know that helium is an inert gas. But if I had to ask you, which are the 4 most prominent elements of which human bodies are made of? What do you think they'd be? 4 most common elements that human bodies are made of. Carbon, right? Carbon, nitrogen, what else? Hydrogen, yes. And oxygen, yes, exactly. So I think some of you understood that it was a trick question. If you see, it is not by coincidence, not by chance that human beings are made of exactly the same elements that the universe is made of, right? So we are if we are able to shed the hubris and able to see, we are but, as a very famous philosopher has said, stardust floating around, right? We are an insignificant part of a very, very, very big universe. And for us to then define everything as if we are the universe is something worth challenging. Okay. Now, the second part of my question, in case you're still not convinced, is I think more of an easier guess. If this football field on your screens is the timeline of the universe with 0, 0 on the x-axis, 0, 0 being the Big Bang, and the farthest right being today on the timeline of the universe, then when do you think human beings came into being? So if this is the Big Bang, this is today, when do you think human beings came into being? Is it the left of the football field, midline, D, penalty box? Where do you guys think? Goalpost. Also, tell me which half, left or right?
I think very right, I would say.
All right. So Akshita is saying very right. I think Aditya is also saying that. Dhruv is saying D line right half. All right. What else? Anyone for the left? No? All right. So in actuality, human beings came into existence on this football field of the universe's timeline, equivalent to the thickness of a blade of grass. That is how recent we are. And I'm not saying the width of a blade of grass. The width of a blade of grass on an average is 1/16 of an inch. I'm saying the thickness of a blade of grass. And that's how recent we are in this universe. So for those of us who think that universe environment should be defined about us, for us, the way it is, considering only the prerequisites that you and I require to survive, we should be able to think outside the box and think beyond what human beings require, because there's so much more to everything around us than just human beings, right? And all of this comes from the concept of anthropocentrism. I would not take very long on this. I'm assuming that all of us know about this, but anthropocentrism quite literally means human-centric. So anthro means human, humanoid, human-like, and centric means centric. And anthropocentric means that everything around human beings is for our utilization, for our exploitation. Everything apart from us is a resource for us, right? So that's what anthropocentrism is. And if you think that you do not believe in anthropocentrism, that you're an ecocentric person, that you care for sustainability, you care for environment, just know that your carbon footprint in the couple of decades that you have been on this planet for is higher than that of all of your forefathers, ancestors put together, right? So that's the kind of carbon footprint each of us have. And then to claim that, you know, we're not anthropocentric, we're ecocentric, and I care about the environment, which is very encouraging for the world. And it's a good outlook to have, but we should also be realistic about where we stand in terms of our approaches and philosophies. Because this is a question that usually gets everyone going. Everyone has an opinion on this. I have a question now for all of you, all 15, 16 of us. If everyone's kind of understood what anthropocentrism is, I'd like you to tell me if non-vegetarianism, as it is called in India, or meat eating, is that an anthropocentric activity or not? Where do you stand on that spectrum, whether meat eating is an anthropocentric activity or is it an ecocentric activity? What are your views? And before you tell me what it is for you, please also let me know whether you're a vegetarian or not, so that I can contextualize where that is coming from. All right, who wants to go? What do you guys think? Is vegetarianism ecocentric? Is that a better way to put it? Or is meat eating anthropocentric? Where do we stand? All right, let's hear from Srividya.
So if my understanding is right, anthropocentrism is basically where human beings are dominant over other species, right?
Right, right.
So I feel like non-vegetarianism is something conforming to anthropocentrism.
All right. And do you mind sharing with us if you are vegetarian or not?
I'm a vegetarian.
Yeah, so I feel like you're biased there, Srividya. We'll take it's a good point, but we'll take it with a bit of a discount of the fact that, you might be a little biased there. But it's a very well-made point, and that's a very reasonable way of thinking about definitions as well. So if by definition, everything around us is a resource under anthropocentrism, then meat eating could be termed as anthropocentric. Who else? What else? Yes, let's hear from Dhruv.
Yeah, sir. So just to begin with, I am a meat eater. I am non-vegetarian.
Okay.
But I feel that industrialization of meat eating is what is anthropocentric.
Yeah. So the chicken
because again,
farms,
when we
pig
talk about
farms, and
because when we think about meat eating in this context, we're only imagining
what's
human
happening
beings
today,
as consumers of meat,
right?
which itself becomes anthropocentric. So I feel at large, the amount of meat being consumed by other animals is also at play there. But if we just talk about the industrialization of it, then it is anthropocentric.
All right. So that's a very good point. Again, the way our consumption patterns have developed might be anthropocentric in nature, but to Dhruv's point, it isn't like 2000 years earlier, this would have been termed as anthropocentric because, that was a way of living. We were looking at ourselves just as another species and not the species that has tamed all the other species and is utilizing all the other species or exploiting all the other species. So excellent point. Anyone else? Where do you guys stand? No one wants to. I know that this is slightly controversial, but it usually gets you to think about how you view environmental ethical approaches, and that's the larger topic that we're covering here. That which are the most important or the biggest environmental ethical approaches that human beings follow, despite you and I even knowing it. So that's the point of this discussion. Anyway, any other thoughts on this? Anthropocentric meat eating, ecocentric meat eating. Vegetarians are fine. Anyone? All right, so we'll just move on. And I want to sort of bring home the point that human beings have always been anthropocentric. And there are fair arguments which say that some tribal populations, some indigenous populations are ecocentric in nature, but majority of human beings through civilization have been, majority of societies through the the beginning of civilization have been anthropocentric in nature. Let me tell you a little story, but for that to happen, you'll have to answer a couple of questions. These three photos on your screen are all from the same city and the same decade. I want you to be able to guess the city and the decade. Now, please do not think that this is too difficult, because the hints are all there. The hints are on your screen in the photos. You just have to guess the decade and the city. Guesses are more than welcome. Again, I do not expect you to know the right answer to this unless you've seen the photo and researched it, but guesses, if any. Which city is this? Enough hints on your screens. And which decade is this? Anyone? Which city, which decade? Yes, Dhruv.
New York in the 60s.
Okay, close. It is the 60s. It is the late 60s, early 70s, but it's not New York. What city could this be? It's a reasonable guess, obvious guess, but that's not it. Anyone else? It is an American city. So Dhruv, you're right. That whole Pan Am Airlines board should have given away. But anyone else? What city might this be? All right. So this is LA, Los Angeles, late 1960s, early 70s, but more towards late 60s. Now, the feature of the city of these photos is, I don't know if you can make out, but the city is almost engulfed by smog, right? The smog back in the 60s in LA was so bad that on a good day, you could only see beyond, or you could not see beyond 5 meters, right? On a bad day, the visibility was very, very poor. People were scared that their children, unborn children, would be born with eczema, emphysema, asthma, all of those terrible diseases, just because of the amount of pollution that existed in the air. Okay. That is how bad the situation was in the 1960s LA. And if any of us have been to LA in recent times or seen it in movies or wherever, would know that that does not exist anymore. And what happened in the interim is what I want to tell you more about. So when the pollution situation got so bad in LA, people started getting together. They started protesting against the kind of pollution there was. They started having political movements, so much so that a lot of policy and technological interventions happened in the ensuing 30, 40 years. Biggest of which, one might argue, was the 1972 Stockholm Conference, right? So while you might say that this is a very localized issue, how does Stockholm Conference come from this? Well, this issue became so big that, those converters in your exhaust pipe of vehicles were invented, were starting to be used. Check engine light was being used more prominently. The federal government of the United States came up with the Federal Air Quality Act, in which the states could have even higher standards of air control than the ones prescribed by the federal government. The California Air Task Force was set up today, what is known as CARB, California Air Regulatory Board. But basically, this one mess of a pollution-ridden situation steamrolled the world into talking about environment and what a lot of academics believe was the golden age of environment. So 1970s generally is supposed to be, is seen as the golden age of environment, right? The Stockholm Conference happened soon after. If you talk of India, in 1974, the Water Act happened, 81, the Air Act happened, 86, the Environment Protection Act happened. So a lot of things started happening because people were now talking about environment, right? And a lot of good things happened. I talked about the policy and technological interventions. There were legal interventions, innovations. All of those things were happening because people were bothered about the pollution, right? Now, the question to be asked is, yes, academics say that it was the golden age of environment, but what led to the golden age of environment? What ushered us into the golden age of environment? And the answer to that question is that what propelled us into the golden age of environment is the concern that our kids were being born with diseases due to the pollution, that I could not see beyond 5 meters, that I have to wear this hideous mask that's on your screens every day, every time I step out, right? The visibility is so low. So many issues that came along with pollution and smog. A lot of people can compare it to the Beijing smog and the Delhi smog as well. So my point is that the causation of that golden age of environment was, in fact, the concern of human beings about human beings, right? About their health and their children's well-being and their lifestyle and their visibility and everything. So if you think about it, even the golden age of environment was a result of the most anthropocentric view of environment. So even in our best time, we did not have a non-anthropocentric or an ecocentric or biocentric approach. We had an anthropocentric approach, which was cruxed on whether you and I could breathe, right? Or our ancestors or forefathers could breathe. And that's one of the major takeaways from how environmental policy has developed over time. That we need to be able to disassociate any prospective plan or any prospective economic human-centric and ecocentric or environmental centric. Okay. Now, there's another thing that happens when you have these policy and legal and technological interventions. So let's take this person on your screen who's wearing a mask, right? This guy. Let's name him John, right? Now, John has been suffering because of the air pollution. John he's also scared for the health of his children, right? Hypothetical all of this is. I'm assuming that John is concerned about these things. I can't say for sure. I can't even say for sure if John is his name. But John runs, say in this example, a factory, right? He's doing reasonably well. He runs a factory, he manufactures some goods and makes a decent profit. As a result of all of this political movement around environment and making things better and making air quality better, of which John himself was a part, because remember, he's concerned about his health and his children's health and having to wear a mask. Everything happens and every new intervention happens and people are starting to work about environment and governments are concerned about the environment. And one fine day, John wakes up and John sees that now when he has to carry on his business, right? keep manufacturing products in his factory, he has to apply for 10 permits and 5 compliances and 2 impact assessments and so many consents from so many government authorities. And he also gets to know that now it has been mandated that he has to get his the exhaust pipe of his vehicle retrofitted with an airbag filter or a catalytic converter or all of these things. And then he gets to know that he has to install the check engine light in his car, and all of those things happen, right? That means that while the government and the policy and the technology was on the right path towards making LA or the US or the world pollution free, for that to happen, there was a cost associated with it, right? So John had to pay the compliance fee, the technological upgrading in his factory, in his car, in his home, wherever, right? So if John and everyone who's driving cars here and everyone who's working in these buildings and everyone who's walking on your screens had to pay a price to make the world environmentally sustainable, then is that fair? And that's the larger conversation about intergenerational equity that I want to have. And I know that I'll finish in the next 15 minutes. So if any of you are interested in that conversation, I invite all of you to contact me. You can visit the website. My colleague Aditi has already shared all the details in the chat box. But the larger question, as I was prior to them in LA, right? So it's not just this generation who caused this. It was generations which existed prior and kept on polluting, and cumulatively, generation after generation, the pollution started building up and eventually it came to this position, right? Now, if that is the case, if every one of the generations before John's benefited by polluting because they did not have to pay compliances and they did not have to install airbag filters or catalytic converters or any of those other pollution control devices, and they were benefiting from that industrial activity or that vehicular activity that was making money for them, right? So if everyone benefited from that pollution, but it's only these folks and John on your screen who have to pay the price for cleanup of the air, right? By those compliances and converters and such, then is it fair? Any views on this? What do you guys think?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so if the generations prior to John's or the people in your screens have been polluting and have back in the day caused the LA pollution to be as it was, then why should the cost for cleanup be paid only by that generation that you see on your screens? Because the generations prior have polluted and gone away, right? But now when it comes to the cleanup, it's only this generation on your screen which has to pay for compliances and technological interventions and policy interventions and legal mechanisms and consents to operate and consents to establish and hazardous waste and all of those things. Do you think that it is fair, is what my question is. Yes, let's hear from Dhruv and then Srividya in the order of hands raised.
Yeah, so I think any sort of development or developmental intervention would require one generation to sort of adjust to the change that is being made. And I mean, I feel like this is not just applicable to environmental changes or environmental sanctions, but also to something like diversity, as recent as diversity. So, the whole corporate structure might have been defined to help a certain faction of people or a certain class of people. And as times moved on and other people got access to these areas or to these industries, the newer generation and safe and secure environment. So I think it's more about, taking that first step rather than, looking at things in retrospect, because it won't really lead us anywhere productive.
Right. So Dhruv, I want you to stick to this thought because I know I'm running out of time, but I'm just gonna leave this snippet before we end this discussion. So I'll come back to what you just said, that this is business as usual and there's no point ruminating about who contributed or what happened in the past, because that would not lead us anywhere. Again, I'll come to that one. Srividya.
Sir, I also agree with Dhruv. Like, it isn't fair. I think it isn't, but that doesn't mean we just have to contribute to the problem. I think the similar problem is there with developing countries and Western countries or developed countries. They have contributed a lot to most of the problems that are existing related to environment, but it's still the developing countries which have to pay for it. So that issue is there in here also, and it is being taken up when we talk about international policies on environmental issues. So I just wanted to bring that.
All right, Srividya, you've made my job a lot easier. You've basically explained what I was going to explain about environmental diplomacy, environmental international relations, by taking the example of John and LA of the 1960s. But basically, Dhruv, to your point, and I agree with your point that there's no point ruminating in the past and who did what, because then there will be no progress made. But the fact of the matter is that even today, a majority of environmental international relations is run on common but differentiated responsibility principle, which is all about historically who's been culpable and today how much they have to pay for their culpability of the past, right? So the concept of CBDR, as I said, common but differentiated responsibility, or that of the beneficiary pays principle, as it is called in international environmental law, are concepts that frame every conversation that happens on environmental international relations, right? So one, there's a case for arguing against not ruminating about who did what. But the fact of the matter, on the other hand, remains that a majority of the developed world exploited the environment, cut down forests and trees and put a lot of coal and carbon in the atmosphere, coal out of the ground and carbon in the atmosphere. And per capita, that's a lot of carbon emitted over the past 300 years. On the other hand, the developing countries are still sort of, for good or for bad, and not, passing a moral judgment, but putting a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. But per capita, it's still a lot lower than what has been done in the past, right? So at almost every COP, Conference of Parties, or Paris or Glasgow or Copenhagen, or any of those conferences or any of those multilateral agreements, the point of discussion almost always is about what is the developed world's responsibility and what is the developing world's responsibility. And exactly to both of your points, It does not help the conversation. It does not take it any forward. But the fact of the matter remains that people then make it an equity issue, and perhaps justifiably so. And that's where we are at today. So I just wanted to introduce this concept to you. We have a larger lecture and a larger course that we deal with in the GPODS fellowship. So I hope you're able to apply and at least check it out. I'm, as I said, very available on LinkedIn or over email. So I'm also happy to discuss any of the concepts that I've discussed. The whole concept, the whole idea behind this session was to give you a peek into how sustainability works and what are the conversations that are happening, both from an ethical point of view, but also from a realistic point of view. So this is how China and India argue versus, a UK or a US in international circuits at diplomatic level. So that was basically our session, guys. Just an interested in sustainability, if you're interested in applying for higher education and sustainability, and you want to get a bit of experience from these world leaders, such as, faculty from Stanford and Harvard and Oxford and all of these wonderful places, then do check out the GPODS fellowship. It's a 3-month online fellowship that we have. And I'm happy to answer any questions over email. My email, as you might have noticed, was on the first slide of the session. And that's my session, guys. If there are any comments or feedback, I'm happy to listen in. Otherwise, as I said, please feel free to reach out to us and happy to answer any queries there as well. All right. Thank you, guys. I think we could end it here. Feel free to email or reach out on LinkedIn, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Thank you.